So before we get started, can we get just a show of hands of kind of who we have in the room? Who identifies as a community leader? A couple, amazing.
Raise your hand.
Yeah, represent. Any investors? A couple, okay. Artists? Amazing. Who did I not mention? Who am I missing?
Yeah.
Cultural leaders. Amazing. Okay, awesome. Well, we should have a great conversation that touches on all of that. So we'll have one kind of at the intersection of art and culture and community health, and super excited about everyone here. And I think Penelope wins for coolest profile photo. So yeah, so we'll talk about, what does the future of community health look like in the United States? What would happen if we invested in culture and artists the same way that we invest in science and scientists, with patient capital, with a long-term perspective, and by building infrastructure that really supports experimentation. And we'll explore different ways of how communities, artists, and investors can really co-design place-based upstream interventions that drive at equitable health, community agency, self-determination, and ultimately well-being. And we have a great panel that kind of represents various spaces and sectors, from the neighborhood level to a kind of a sector level to a systemic level, and their share models where a spectrum of impact capital invest in community assets such as safety and belonging, reducing downstream costs, and ultimately, again, building agency, wealth, and health for generations to come. So with that being said, let me make sure that we fully introduce our panelists, and they have robust bios, so let me read those. So first we have Adriana Abizadeh-Barbour from the Kensington Corridor Trust in Philadelphia. Adriana is the executive director of KCT. The mission, duty, and purpose of the trust is to utilize collective ownership to direct investments on the corridor to preserve culture and affordability while building neighborhood power and wealth in Kensington. Adriana is also a policy fellow at Princeton University and Rutgers University. With deep interest in public policy, she's taken every opportunity to utilize her privileged position as a nonprofit leader to speak out for what she believes and to live the voices of impacted community members. Immersed in policy initiatives, she has facilitated community collaboration to address the intersectionality between immigration status, housing, poverty, and race.
Yay!
Yay! Big clap, big clap. We have Maisha Leek of the Pacifica Research Group. Maisha is a cultural strategist and investor and civic leader whose work resides at the nexus of art, technology, commerce, and community. She dedicates her career to preserving and elevating Black and diaspora culture, ensuring creative expression is honored as both heritage and future. Maisha has played a central role in structuring landmark partnerships such as Gucci and Dapper Dan, reclaiming and celebrating Harlem fashion lineage and luxury and streetwear, and Chance the Rapper's social work program in collaboration with Google and Chicago Public Schools, delivering high-tech enabled arts and computer science resources to youth. She advises Digital Diaspora, a Web3 community of artists and creators working to assert ownership, identity, and economic agency in emerging digital landscapes. She was also on the founding team of United Masters, a platform built to support independent music artists in owning their masters, leveraging data and partnerships outside of traditional label structures. All right. And finally, we have Penelope Douglas of Culture Bank. Penelope has spent her career at the intersection of social investment, art and culture, and the health of communities. She spent the last several years working with others in cooperative, collaborative, distributed leadership, and solidarity models. She's currently the co-founder of Culture Therapy, a 2-year-old initiative using creativity to listen to and magnify how young people are using art and creative expression for their mental health. The initiative is also a community partner and advisor to the Hidden Healing Fund, a donor-advised fund which includes Pinterest and Lululemon among its funders. HHF has already made unrestricted grants to 11 organizations whose work with young people nurtures healing. She's also the co-creator and co-leader of Culture Bank, an initiative originally piloted before the pandemic, which continues to focus on new models of investment that value artists highly as critical actors for communities' long-term vibrancy and well-being. All right. There you go. Yeah. So to kind of just level set, I love to just hear a little bit about what brings all of you to this work and to community health. Adriana, do you want to get started?
Happy to. Hi, friends.
Hi,
Almost
Adriana.
friends. Hey.
Hello, Adriana.
Hello. Is it working? I think it's on. It's on. Thanks, Marisha. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, friends, y'all are asleep.
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone.
We're gonna have fun.
Yeah,
We're gonna have fun in this session. So come on.
yes, we're here to be in community with each other and share space. Again, thanks, Norbert, for the intro. I'm Adriana Pisade Barbour, excited to be with all of you. I think culture and art and placemaking and the communities that we find ourselves in, a lot of that is really instilled in us from a young age, whether we realize or not, right? The sensory that's around us, the people that we are exposed to, the spaces that our parents or guardians take us to or often don't take us to, right? So the lack of access also informs the way that we view and touch art and history and culture. And so for me, growing up, my mom was an activist. So I'm from Puerto Rico originally. And for many of you who may or may not know, Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. So we're a commonwealth. We are not a state. And there's been a large activist movement for many years to gain independence in Puerto Rico. And so my mom was an activist in that movement. And so I spent a lot of time in activist spaces, Black and brown spaces, predominantly and primarily focused on preservation of language, preservation of history, preservation of religion, right? Just all of the things that we hold sacred and dear. And I think it has very directly informed the way that I show up as an organizer, the way that I show up as someone who is investing capital that we're deploying at a local level, the way in which I show up for leadership, the way I show up as an ally and a colleague, all of that is informed by what I was exposed to as a young person around what culture meant and what was important in that preservation of culture. Thanks.
Thanks again for the intro. Good afternoon, everyone. To your question, Norbert, I think for me, my connection to this work started as a young child. I went to Philadelphia Public Schools. There was a partnership between, I think, PNC Bank at the time and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And they were showing the Barnes collection for the first time. And I had always gone to the museums and the libraries we have on the Parkway in Philadelphia. But that curriculum, which was brought into public schools, was the first time I understood place in art. The idea that I could ask questions about it, manipulate it, understand it. I was a middle school kid at the time, just to give you a sense of timing. It wasn't until I left politics and started working for high-profile talent, celebrities, that I understood what you can demand commercially with regard to the people you cared about, regard to your work. And so I come to this conversation today sort of going from the recipient of an experience and being taught what it is to connecting with people who were incredibly demanding of commercial actors about how their art would be used. And it's really informed everything I've done since.
Hi, everybody. I'm Penelope. I'm really glad to see you all, particularly some close friends who are here. So thank you all for being here with us. And I really hope this is an exchange and not just us talking to you. This is an intimate enough group that I hope we can make that happen. Norbert, we're counting on you.
Do my best.
Counting on you guys as well.
In any event, what brought me to this work? Well, I am an artist. I was, always been an artist as a child, all the way growing up, persuading my family to look at my art and my stories and everything that I created. But really, the most important thing to say is that I came to this work, the work we're talking about today, because I spent years as what was called a pioneer in community development investment, co-founded an organization that was an innovator in the area of what are called community development finance institutions. Some of you are here, thankfully, with us today. And I found myself midlife understanding that I should look at these questions of how we could create an equitable future for us all through the lens of myself as an artist rather than myself as an investor, and through opportunities that I had to be in residency both at the Federal Reserve Bank and at an art center at the same time. I had a chance to look at this question more deeply. And I discovered that for myself anyway, the billions of capital, it's actually probably trillions of capital that flows from the at least federal sources, not counting regional and state sources, into long left out communities, at least at this point, hasn't brought us the shared equitable future that I know we all care about. And so I just wanted to think about that in a different way. And I became committed to the idea that artists are, in fact, central actors, guides on the ground that can really help us understand and illuminate community assets, the issues that are hard to uncover, the treasures that every community possesses in the spirit of models that communities can build for themselves. So I'm deeply committed to the work of thinking about artists as highly investable in the context of impact-oriented investment.
Amazing, thank you. I'd love to hear if, given the breadth of your work, if there's a specific story, a project, or a moment that you think best exemplifies kind of the nexus of this conversation, right? That kind of illuminates culture-driving community health.
Happy to kick. I'll give a recent example, and I think I want to back up to just say there's a culture of fill in the blank, right? Culture of community health, which I'm happy to offer an example of, but culture of language, culture of people, culture of anything you put, culture of capitalism, right? You can put anything at the end of that. There's a culture to that, right? And a culture is the thing that pulls us together and helps us to find some unification in what we believe in, what we see possible, what we want to build. And some of the folks in the room know this, but at the Kensington Corridor Trust in early August, we had our first ever fire at one of our properties, which was wild and crisis-like and all the things you're expecting. Thankfully, no one was hurt, which is the important thing of this story. But there was this unifying moment of culture that has been sitting with me now for, almost 3 months now. One of our board members went to respond to the fire first because they lived closest to the building once we were notified. And as soon as they got there, they were trying to kind of cut through the police and the fire department and lots of standbyers or observers. And I'm on the phone with her, and all of a sudden you hear someone in the background who clearly is like an official person, I later found out was a firefighter, asking, does anybody know who owns the building? And all of a sudden I start hearing on the phone, I do, and everybody starts claiming ownership over this building, right? And so my board member was like, what are y'all talking about? Like, I'm coming through with the insurance paperwork. And I'm like, they are all owner, Darlene, right? Like, they are literally doing the thing, right? This is the culture work that we've been doing of what it means to collectively own and take responsibility and accountability and ownership over this work. And it was this deeply affirming moment, like, our building is literally on fire. Everybody's on the street. We're trying to figure out if everybody's okay. And everybody's ready to step up, right? Like, just in mass, folks were like, yes, like, I am the owner, I am the owner, I am the owner, which was very confusing for the fire department. So we've decided we've got to do some work on that, right? Like, what happens in crisis response? And so, like, we're actively talking about, like, do our insurance policies need to be, like, publicly available so that if there is a crisis and one of the co-owners responds before one of the board members or the staff, right? So anyway, so lots of culture work still to be done, but it was just this beautiful moment of, like, what it means to hold community and hold culture around ownership and how that shows up in a very real way around the community's health, right? Like, this building was actively on fire and everybody was ready to step up and do what needed to be done and take accountability and responsibility in the midst of a crisis.
Great story.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah, I mean,
It's amazing.
Like, it literally just happened. So I'm, like, holding it. I'm still very much holding it.
Maisha?
Yeah, in my bio, we talk a little bit about my work, and some of it is technology-driven. And so if we think about community health from the perspective of agency or safety, an example for me really is digital diaspora. And I want to also talk about that, Berdan, for a second, but just to complete the two.
And I think we have an image, right?
Yeah, I'll show that in a second
screen.
just to make sure that, just 1 second on that one, to make sure that I can illustrate the example. During the pandemic, I think you guys would remember this sort of rush for this thing called NFTs. Actually, it was a very crazy time, once upon a time. And in that moment, a lot of Black and brown artists who are multimedia artists were taking a stab at this work because fundamentally what you needed was your laptop to work and the ability to work on images and then put them on the platform. But the rush for Web3 very much mirrored the rush we see in Silicon Valley, meaning the people who were owning the space and deciding who would be winners or losers treated very white, very male, very exclusionary. Even when we came out of the pandemic and there was an opportunity for folks to be in person, artists, largely Black and brown artists, that were seeking this tool, for lack of a better word, to express themselves, found themselves shut out. People didn't want hip hop at their shows. They didn't want that kind of element. Every sort of rough thing that's the antithesis of future forward was playing itself out. Digital diaspora was a response of very, very young artists, and there's a Netflix documentary right now called Minted that covers some of this, was a response of like creating a flank, a special safe place in the Web3 universe for Black and brown people to tell their stories without being marginalized relatively aggressively. There was a lot that happened to physical safety and some other issues. And so when we think about art creating that space, these artists created a collective in real time to keep themselves safe while they navigated commercialism, and to great success. Diana Sinclair, who I work with, was 17 years old and sold her first work at Christie's, who's one of the early artists that did that, followed by Sotheby's. That would not have been possible, but for her establishing community, they could create an echo chamber about her work and its value and Black people being in the future, which is still really a very stressful concept for some people. Another way that artists have created space and ownership, we talk about agency, and this is where I want to tell the story with the image about Dapper Dan. I don't want to assume that people know who he is, so I'll take you through it. Penelope, can you hit that arrow for me on there? Like, no, right on the, I'll show you.
What do you want to do?
I think
arrow.
it's this one.
Oh, not that
There
one.
we go. Okay, so what you're looking at here are two images, and some of you guys might remember this from 2018. The image on the left is made by Dapper Dan, who was a street artist, streetwear artist. He's truly a tailor by every means. Most of the iconic images of hip hop in the 80s, early 90s, the outfits that they're wearing from, you know, Rakim to LL Cool J were made by this man in Harlem. And what you can see that he's done here is at a time when fashion houses did not create streetwear. What I mean is that they only created elegant clothing. They did not create tracksuits, jackets, sneakers, everything that they're known for right now. He was using logos, and Logo Mania was a part of it, and making his own original designs. The images you see on the right is from, so the image on the left is from 1989, and this is, gosh, I forget her name. She's an Olympian, and she had her jacket made, you know, Harlem People, single Harlem People. On the right is an image from the cruisewear collection for Gucci in 2017. That's not made by Dapper Dan. It was posted, and the Olympian is the one that posted and said, "That's my jacket, and this is made by this Black artist." It wound up being this whole big kerfuffle, but the main story about place and agency is what Dapper Dan decided to do in that moment. He had a lot of choices. He could take a check. He could go quietly into the night. What he did instead, and this man is, I think, now in his early 80s, was insist on a few things. One, we're going to collaborate. You're going to rewrite the history of me being a felonious thief of your material and acknowledge the fact that I invented an entire category that is the entryway for all of your brands. Most fashion brands, the money they make are on accessories and streetwear. It's not on the high-end article. And then he went a step further, which I didn't really understand. I talked about celebrity or people in power making the demand and teaching me what you could ask for. I was assigned to negotiate the partnership because I had just seen Dap and his son the week before, and we were talking about history, and Dap is this kind of person that wants to put Black and brown people on. So it's like, you have no experience, but you're gonna do this for me. It'll be fine. And when they asked him, okay, we'll rebuild your atelier, the place where you make custom work, and we'll put our brand behind it, they wanted to put it downtown in Manhattan. Dap insisted that we rebuild it in Harlem. And the reason why that's important is that if you wanted these originals that had come back at a time when people were worried about retro, you had to go to Harlem to get it made. You had to shop in Harlem to get it made. And it brought this sort of nexus of art, culture, commerce, you know, question mark, add in the rest of it, to Harlem, because the artists made a demand on behalf of their community, and the rest of the world had to follow. Diane Dixon, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ken. That's why we have Ken here. He follows me to everything. Thanks, Ken.
That's hard to follow. That was so beautiful, both of you. I'm going to take us back down to the ground, even though I think I'm supposed to be the systems person on this panel, and I'm going to give you a really grounded couple of examples of how an artist is a critical actor and a guide on the ground to a determinant of our health and well-being. So the example I'm going to give you is from a neighborhood called Oak Cliff in Dallas, Texas. It's a very underserved, systemically left out place that has a very strong sense of itself and building power as a community every single day. In Oak Cliff, there's a beautiful entrepreneur who is an artist. And I'm going to talk a lot about artists as leaders of enterprises, as well as other kinds of ways in which they're guides on the ground for us all. But in this case, Tisha Creer is also an entrepreneur. And Tisha opened a juice shop. This is a highly investable opportunity. This is the kind of opportunity that people at SOCAP talk about when they talk about small businesses. But what Tisha Creer was thinking about was not just a healthy set of products that she could sell the mailman and all of the neighbors in her community who wanted something healthy to eat and to stop by and have a place to gather and to talk, and who would tell her about how their blood pressure reading apparently had gone down as a result of being a consumer of her beautiful products. The most important thing about Tisha's thought process is where she put her juice shop. And she put her juice shop in the most heavily traveled corridor for the youngest kids in the community to get from point A, their homes in the community, to their school. And so what she was really thinking about was a very important determinant of our health, which is called community safety. And so whoever you were in that community, you could celebrate an investable opportunity by an artist-led enterprise that clearly would meet anyone's impact goals, but that what critically for me is demonstrating how art and culture are transformers of the health of a community. And I know a lot of you in this room, so I know many of you have examples just like this.
It's amazing, thank you. And I think that is a great segue to kind of the question I have about the various forms and of capital use and the kind of barriers that traditional markets present in terms of funding a lot of your work. So again, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, the kind of the structure of KCT and how it's designed, and who are the sorts of investors that you work with, and what are the kind of proper capital structures that support the model.
Okay, I'll try to do this in a short amount of time. So the Kensington Quarter Trust, who's familiar? Okay, friends, welcome, Kensington Quarter Trust. So we are the nation's first neighborhood trust. We were born in 2019. What is a neighborhood trust? It is a model that allows you to collectivize ownership of real estate so that the neighbors can self-determine their future. So they determine what types of small businesses they want, what the rental rates are, who gets to own and collectively decide. All of that is determined by the folks who are living in and have small business in the 19134 zip code, which is Kensington in Philadelphia. We've been at this work now for about 5.5 years. We have 31 assets that are held in trust and that are collectively owned by 32,000 residents and small business owners in our 6 census tracts that we touch. We currently have our 32nd asset under agreement, which will completely game change the model, both from a scaling perspective and replication effort. It'll grow our square footage by 300% and our unit count by 150%. So yes, so we're really, really excited, and also preparing for lots of change and internal capacity building. The way that we operationalize this work, and we do that through capital attraction, is we bring in integrated capital. So we're bringing in both grant dollars, non-recoverable capital from foundations, from individual investors, alongside debt capital. And that debt capital that we're bringing in is very specific. We have a really tight sauce around what type of debt capital we can accept. It has to be patient. So for us, that means 10 to 15 years. It has to be low interest. And so for us, that means 0 to 2%. We also ask that you give us some runway on the front end to operationalize your capital. So give us somewhere between 3 and 7 years, whatever feels best to you. 7 feels great to me. 3 feels good to you. We'll land at 5 to acquire the asset, redevelop the asset, reactivate the asset, so that I can then get it into a place where it's revenue producing and get you your capital back plus interest. We've been doing that now for the last 5.5 years or so. We've put together about $20 million in integrated capital, which is what has allowed us to do the 31 acquisitions that we have to date. This next acquisition is upwards of 20 million, so we actually are going to double our pot over the next couple of months to bring in this really large asset. But yeah, so that's how we do it. And what I will also just note is we do tap in a lot to wealth advisors, so independent wealth advisors, to help us tap into high net worth folks who both are unfamiliar with our model and need to know and learn, but who are also trying to deploy capital and are looking for pipeline and investable projects. And so we spend a lot of time going across the country in places like SOCAP, getting to know folks, family offices, wealth advisors, foundations, individual folks who are managing their own wealth, to see what opportunities exist for some of that integrated capital. The last thing I'll just note is that we try really hard to get folks to commit to both sides because it's really difficult to operationalize capital without staff. And we don't want to apply debt to our staffing structure because, you know, it's not generating like a direct financial return that allows us to recover your capital to you. So we're typically asking folks to match their debt with about a 10 to 20% operating gift one time alongside that debt structure, which then allows us to make sure that we have the capacity to deploy it quickly and effectively. The last thing I'll just note, because I didn't mention it, is we don't currently integrate government funding into our model. We will likely at some future point. The reason we haven't at this time is because it allows us to move far more quickly and more nimbly in the market, like other investors would. And that way we can try to get ahead of the curve around the displacement that's actively happening in our neighborhood as a result of gentrification pressures.
Awesome. Maisha, same question for you. Are there any specific forms of funding that work best in the space other than, you know, nonprofit or VC funding?
Yeah, I would say for most of my experiences are artists deciding or leveraging an existing project to help other artists. So even in the, you know, Web3 or whatever blockchain-backed project people have, I'm finding that a lot of artists are thinking about what they can give to their supporters and how their supporters can help fund their next work. There is still a very active patronage system around the arts, but it's opaque. It's hella predatory. It's, you know, there aren't any sort of standard agreements that I find that artists are leaning into. And so I find that their behaviors around capital are a little different. For example, one artist that I worked with got a big paycheck, was a fan of a friend who wanted to open a gallery using a new model, took half of her paycheck, funded his gallery, he opens gallery, shows her work. Like, that's really how they're very much bootstrapping it, because the concern, I think that artists today are a bit more cognizant and thoughtful about ownership, long-term rights of access and use. And so they're trying to be as smart as they possibly can, not to become a cautionary tale of something else. With Chance the Rapper in particular, when he won Grammys that year, it changed the way music artists thought about what they could own and what they would demand then from streaming platforms or publishing platforms like United Masters. And so I'm finding that when it comes to the market around these artists, the artists themselves are making the market, trying to set their own choices, mostly powered by technology in ways that they hadn't been before.
Awesome. And Penelope, on the site, you talk specifically about kind of how the failure of the mainstream funding system across, you know, traditional bank funding and other forms of capital kind of failing artists. How do you think about kind of solving that failure?
I think I understand your question. I don't know how many of you were in the session earlier today that was talking about a reset. Some of you were, I know, in terms of thinking about impact investing. To me, this has to start with really understanding the idea of de-risking impact, as opposed to de-risking the financial side of impact investing. And so I'm going to stay centered on the idea of art and artists as central actors in providing opportunities for healthier communities in the future. So if I can have you join me in sort of that thought process, then what is really important to me is that we understand, first of all, that communities have all sorts of very valuable assets. Mm-hmm. Investors actually have all sorts of very valuable assets. In fact, my beautiful colleague here just alluded to something that is kind of the irony of bringing this conversation into one room, which is you have the art collector, with control over a tremendously valuable set of assets. And here we are talking about the critical idea of investing in artists as central actors for the future health of all of our communities. Well, what assets might a collector be able to use to increase the opportunity for leverage for other kinds of investment? Art. Mm-hmm. Even if it's simply as a pledge, just a gesture by understanding the assets that they own that happen to be art in service of what we all think of when we think of art as activism, art as movement building, art as holders of culture, art as rooting us to the places that allow us to know who we are. So I can talk a lot about actual investment structures, but I wanted to just name that right away because I think it's a really important point to sort of open the conversation up. I'm supposed to be the systems person on this panel to ensure that we're thinking about the bigger question, and then we can get down. I can be as grounded as you like, but that's mm-hmm. an important question.
Yeah. And then thinking more about governance and ownership, Adriana, can you talk more about governance at KCT and kind of how that intersects with agency, with co-designing, and with self-determination?
Absolutely. So at the Neighborhood Trust, we practice neighborhood governance. What that means for us is that every year in January, we do an open call, neighborhood-wide. Anyone who is co-owner, so about 32,000 folks, is eligible to apply or be nominated by someone else in the neighborhood to govern. We have two governing bodies. One is a board of directors for the 501c3 side of our work. The other is called a trust stewardship committee, which is basically the board of the directors for a perpetual purpose trust, which is the other half of our legal structure. And both of these bodies are fully comprised of residents and small business owners in the 19134. We have special seats that are assigned or allotted by archetype. So we're required at all times to have 2 youth under the age of 21. We're required at all times to have 2 resident leaders. These are folks who identify as like block captains or civic association presidents. And we're required at all times to have at least 2 small business owners. The rest can be Mod Podge around, right? Business owners, small business owners and residents. And what this has allowed us to do is a couple of things. One, reach deeply into the ecosystem that is Kensington. I think oftentimes, particularly when folks are looking at inner city neighborhoods or any neighborhood, pick your neighborhood, a rural neighborhood, inner city, suburbia, we look at them as monoliths, right? We're like a certain type of people with certain types of beliefs live here because of whatever geography indicator. Couldn't be further from the truth, right? There are folks who live just blocks away from each other, who have vastly different lived experiences, vastly different ideologies. And so through an open call system, we've moved away from traditional governance, right? So traditional governance, which we call elbow tap governance, is, hey, Maisha, hey, I'm on this board, and we're looking for people with your expertise. And because you're in my ecosystem, I think you should come take a seat, right? That's how most of us get recruited to boards, is we know someone who asked us to join, and then we come. But we were already a part of the same peer network. We likely already have a lot of the shared and same similar ideologies. And so we now are part of groupthink, right? And we're going to make decisions in a bubble. And so what we decided several years ago is actually folks across these census tracts, while they have shared experiences that are similar and they have shared backgrounds in race, socioeconomics, educational attainment, they're all thinking differently because they've all been exposed to the system that is society and government and all of these things in a different way. And so the open call has allowed us to tap into so many different networks of people who never met each other and live blocks away from each other. Our corridor is 1.4 miles long. That is not super far, friends. 1.4 miles, like we could walk it. We could go walk it right now. People who have never met each other, who would never otherwise meet each other, but through this open call process are now like, oh, I collectively own. I want to be a part of the governance. I want to decide, right? I want to be one of the ones who's helping to make those decisions. And so that open call is super successful. We're typically outpaced about 5 to 1 for the open seat, so 5 applicants for every open seat. And we've seen that grow year over year. So it used to be like 2 applicants for the open seat, then 3, then 4, now we're at 5. Hopefully this January maybe we'll be at 6 or 7, because as more folks become aware of the opportunity to govern, more folks are applying. The other thing that we do with our governance is we compensate folks for their time. So most boards are not compensated boards, particularly in the nonprofit space, right? Because there's this like big icky thing around like paying people for their nonprofit volunteer service. Here's the reality. 1, you're legally allowed to. 2, these folks are low, moderate income folks who are tapped for their time, right? Like their time is used in such very different ways than the way in folks that middle and high income earners are using their time. And so why the hell wouldn't we compensate folks for their time, right? They are expert in their neighborhood. They are expert in what they want to see. They are the ones that are on the ground in community and conversation with their neighbors and the other small business owners. And so the neighbors set their own pay rate a couple years ago, and it's double the living wage per hour. So for Philadelphia County, that is currently just over 21 an hour and some change, so it amounts to 43 something per hour, which amounts to, for each individual governing member, about a $1,200 stipend per year. So it's not a ton of money, but it says, hey, we like understand that when you came to this 2-hour meeting, there was a ton of value in your time, in your energy, and expertise. We feed folks, we provide childcare, we do translation services, whatever is the thing that you need to show up and be prepared and ready to govern, we want to make sure that that's available to you. As an organization, our ethos is if I'm in the room being paid, you're in the room being paid, right? Because I'm an ED, like I'm a paid staff person. I don't live in this neighborhood. So it's only equitable that if I'm here getting paid, y'all are getting paid. The other thing that I want to just note about the governance is we're making lots of different decisions. The governing table is, and some of those things include like what buildings will we acquire, who will we redevelop those real estate assets with, in what order do we do that. But one of the most important is what types of small businesses will they attract, and will they allow to come into their collectively owned spaces. And that is a level of self-determination and control that most neighbors will never see in their lifetime, right? It's the ability to say like, on my commercial corridor, I want to have XYZ. And XYZ for Kensington has looked like an art gallery, a hair braiding studio, tons of immigrant-owned businesses, lots of women-owned businesses, lots of first-gen businesses, because folks are electing for their neighbors to come into these spaces. So it's people who are coming from the neighborhood taking on the bricks and mortar. And so those businesses are not only deeply embodying and reflecting back to folks what Kensington is, but people are also excited to support them because they help to bring them into the space. So you're creating this automatic buy-in for support and for the ability to continue to grow. We started leasing in 2022. 100% of the small businesses we've attracted, the business owner either grew up in or currently calls Kensington home. And we've not lost a single business. And we're on a corridor that has very high vacancy and very high crime. And so we've directly combated that through neighborhood interest in their success. Because when they are actively succeeding and paying rent, the value of the assets grow, the value of the portfolio grows, which means that the neighborhood wealth grows. And that's one less storefront that's vacant for when their kid is walking to school, right? And so what does it mean to hold community and hold governance and that shared power in a way that advances the ability to determine what that corridor looks like? And for us, a lot of that has been in the creative space and in the art space. The last thing, I said last thing last time, but the last real thing on this is that we also own an 11-lot pollinator garden that's inside of the trust, which is a very active third space in the neighborhood and is like the hub of our arts and culture work because it's this beautiful outdoor space that folks can gather in for most seasons, not the winter time, but most seasons.
It is beautiful.
Thank you. Yes, thanks, friends. If you go to our website, you'll see all the photos. Or follow us on the Instagram. But yeah, so it is this space where we're able to test and launch a lot of art with lots of different artists. And there is always a priority since all of our work is like circular economy, solidarity economics. When you were lifting up the example about like the artists helping them, I was like, oh my gosh, this is literally our work, right? Like artists investing in artists and like community investing in community and making that dollar stay in the neighborhood longer, right? There's tons of statistics around how long the dollar stays in Black and brown neighborhoods. It's significantly shorter than in higher wealth neighborhoods and predominantly white neighborhoods. And so we're putting that to work, right? Like how do we get it to stay here longer, to reinvest itself, to reinfuse itself, to capitalize, to gain interest, so that we can make sure that Kensington continues to be invested in for the long term.
I think something that is, not negative, but I think the fine art world makes that harder to do, and I think that's a conversation to have with people as SOCAP SOCAP Global specifically, because what I find is that the system that we want to empower artists doesn't exist because art collecting is a private market set by a set group of people that functions in a way that they prefer. Like, we decide what's valuable because the right collector put your art on their wall and not the other wall and all the rest. And so I wonder, and I would love to work this out with folks in the room, like, how do we think about shifting that when it's like so seductive because capital feels so scarce for artists who are foregoing paying their rent to produce work that somebody who makes 1,000 times more than they can will come along to purchase the item. I think it's real. I participate in it, right? Like, I am a part of it, and I have my own value set that says that this isn't how we should do things, but I think it's sort of one of those intractable, real challenges. Ernie Barnes, do you guys remember Good Times? Okay. You know the opening image in Good Times where like the JJ does this whole thing, right? That artist is Ernie Barnes, and he was based out of California, Los Angeles area for a very long time. Black people collected Ernie Barnes for decades. Some of them didn't know what they thought they had. It was like, okay, kind of cool, whatever, put them in their basements. Circa 2020, the Wright Gallery decides that Ernie Barnes matters, brings them to the Frieze Fair, does this incredible auction, sells, I don't think it's the iconic Sugar Shack painting, but one other for, I don't know, I think the sale was like 1.3 million or something like that. And in a flash, because the right person decided, suddenly these pieces that have sat in people's basements matters. How do you create agency if that's the system we're talking about? And I don't have the answer to that, but it's something that I want to surface for folks to think through. Black people decided that Ernie Barnes had value by purchasing his work and keeping it. It did not have market recognition until the right man came along and said, I think this is cool, without the cultural context. God bless him, he's a very lovely guy, by the way. But like, that is something in very real time we are navigating. In the Black Lives Matter movement, everyone thought that there would be a jump in the amount of work collected and originating from Black artists or women artists even. ArtNet did its annual report. It's in the decline. It didn't work. It didn't matter. The conversations we were having about the power of these narratives and culture, it didn't translate into a commercial outcome. And commerce matters because commerce plus people equals something, right, that we care a great deal about. What that means is something that we need to pull apart.
Penelope?
I'm just going to keep this going. These are such important points, and I just want to point out that, you know, money actually is only ascribed a value because human beings decided to.
It's a construct.
So we do this all over and over and over again, and so whether it's art or our financial capital, you know, I think it's a huge and very provocative.
Be provocative now.
area to consider. But as we look down on the ground at artists, my dream state is that we stop having to create emergency funds to bail out artists every time we have a pandemic or a financial crisis, and artists are the ones who are the first responders. I don't know if you've noticed this phenomenon, but for the last like 50 years, every single time that we find ourselves in an emergency, immediately philanthropy and other wealth holders create funds for artists. Why? Because all of a sudden there's the recognition that art is life, that artists are our first responders, that crafts makers are the drivers of our recovery. And so we also keep doing that over and over again. So if we could imagine ourselves in a model of investment where purely and simply, starting with the simplest acts, we value artists highly in every way in which they play a role in our society, that would be a huge step forward. If we could consider artists like we do scientists, as our colleagues yesterday, my colleagues, were talking in our culture session, scientists are researchers of nature. artists could be considered to be the researchers of culture. So if every single time you think about a structure in which you want good governance or good community activism or excellent community investment, purely and simply you thought of an artist as a key peer and decision maker, and to Adriana's point, you compensated that person no less than, and certainly perhaps more than, what is considered to be the wage that you would establish for any of the rest of us who are at that table, even those simple starting points would be very meaningful. And then we can get into the big questions.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and so let's keep that going. So blue sky thinking. So if we do that, what does our world, what do our communities look like in 10, 15 years? And by the way, please start thinking of questions. We have about 10 or 15 minutes left of of our discussion, but we'd love to get less than that. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'm sure you have a lot to add.
Blue sky. I would, there's this a collective I just learned about this week called Next Haven. It's in New Haven, Connecticut. I don't know if it was new to me. It's like, oh, that's dope. And it's started by an artist and a business manager. And the reason why it's on my radar is that they've managed to create place for emerging Black and brown artists, pay them, house them, give them a high school apprenticeship, a high school apprentice to work with them, so resources, without walking away from the reality that when folks leave the fellowship that they're going to meet the market. And so, and what struck me was that they were interested in creating space to really take incredible artistic talent and teach them the game. And for me, I find that although it's like very like cynical on the nose, we're going to be about business, I find that helpful because I think that when many young people consider art as a career or something they want to do, they get stuck at that point of how. Like, you know, I'm good, but where would I live? I mean, quite literally, I'm good, but, you know, after I do this residency, what does it mean? Like, I've had great artists go through incredible residencies, and it's almost like they're spit out of the system and they're back at square one. And so I thought that an artist creating that was pretty powerful, and the way they're thinking about the through line was really valuable. I do wonder more and more about, like, blue sky, a perfect world would be where folks could follow their interests, noting what you shared, Penelope, about like the power of art. Like, the art being made to reflect our time right now is going to be the work that you saw, sort of Ansel Adams photographing the Dust Bowl. Like, this moment we're in that we're experiencing and showing up to work every day and acting like things are normal and then checking our Instagram and being like, holy shit, and back to things as normal as I send this like an email. There's an artist contemplating and making work about that right now that our children, our grandchildren, our loved ones are going to say, is this what it was like? Blue sky would be creating space for people to always be able to have the freedom to ask and answer those questions without worrying about the commercial consequence, because art inherently has value in the way that me speaking to you right now is valuable as we exchange ideas. I don't know what it'll take to do that. I know people are trying it. I do think that it's going to be that artists, to your point, have to be the center because they're the ones riding the wave of the entire experience, and ultimately we benefit from whatever choices they make in those safe spaces.
I'm going to go quickly and then I'll let you go because mine is very quick, which is I'm going to come back to the intersection of art and health. If you have a chance, you can email me or you can find it for yourselves. In December, there'll be a publication in the medical journal that's part of MIT, and it is IRB, in other words, research-approved study from an 18-site, 3-year initiative that I was fortunate to be part of called Arts for Everybody, otherwise known as One Nation, One Project. And what you're going to find out when you read that is that using a very highly disciplined, mixed methods set of techniques in order to evaluate a very simple question that is the heart and soul of all good health outcomes research, which is, Does my participation in art and creative expression increase my sense of social cohesion? 10,000 people participated in this survey, along with the many, many people who were part of a public and private sector partnership over 3 years that culminated in an artistic festival in each of these 18 sites that celebrated the connection of art and health. So in my dream state, we do more of that. We do more of what you talked about. We do more of what I just expressed, so that at some point in the not very distant future, it's simple. We sort of see it, and therefore we have many different actions we can take in order to create this kind of vitality.
Thanks for sharing that. I'll try to pick up on both these threads. One, I want to start with the youth, which is blue sky, and something we think very intentionally about at the Trust is how are we investing in the next generation of leaders who will be artists, who will be culture bearers, culture makers, historians, preservationists. Like, how are we preparing them to take that on in a way that prepares them for the realities of market and social, societal norms and constructs, including the use of capital and money, right? So I think that's one thing that I'm holding, is just we are prepared to do that in a way that is equitable and healthy and prepares folks to have access to upward mobility and thriving state rather than just being surviving, which is what many of the folks in low-income neighborhoods are doing. The second thread that I just want to pick up on is thinking about how we're connecting across place, right? So I think you said 18 sites, right? And 10,000 people connected, right? What does it mean to think about art in place and how that helps to impact folks, traditional social determinants of health, the way that I physically feel when I walk down the street, because I see, right, for Kensington, I'm just gonna name some of the things that sometimes I see, because I see the art gallery is open and they're playing Thai music, right? Because the artist is from Thailand. And so I can just hear the sound from across the world, and I can go down a block and go to the garden, and we have Taino drummers who are there playing music from the diaspora in Puerto Rico. And I can be present in that space. And then I can go down a block and I can be in one of our vacant lots, and we can have Afro-Latinas who are dancing, right? All of that can be present, and all of that is a different form and space of art and culture bearing and history. And it also is very critical to the way that I feel about safety, about place, about my health, about the way that my community shows up and the cohesion in my community, right? There's more and more research showing that we feel more and more disconnected from each other, right? Pre-pandemic and definitely post-pandemic. So what does it look like to use art as a way to reconnect us, to build community health, and to think of place as wealth and health as wealth, and art being a core and central part of that.
Thank you all. Do you have any questions?
No questions.
Oh, plenty. All right.
Yeah, here, have a mic.
I don't know.
There are no wireless.
I feel like
We'll just come.
I feel like you can project.
Come talk to
Nick
us.
has an outside voice.
Yeah.
Nick, you have an outside voice.
Oh, wait, there we go.
Okay, coming to you.
I feel like I'm on a talk show now.
Yes.
So in listening to your presentations, and particularly having familiarity across the various contexts, as I think about the intersections, both of the kinds of challenges that you've named and the solutions, an institution that comes to mind is the local church, right? So Simple Way in Kensington with Shane, Friendship West in Oak Cliff with Freddie Haynes, Chance's Kingdom Kids, Sunday or Vacation Bible School kind of program. Also in terms of the arts, right? Every Sunday, Dapper Dan's mom did the same thing to her outfit. And Dapper Dan's cousin is on an instrument, improvising and deciding what beats are going to be popular, both in that space. How can we think about leveraging spaces that have not thought of themselves as culture bearers in this way to sort of see their work beyond sort of typically the way that we think about religious practice as privatized, right? Spiritual piety. But all of these things are at work, right? There are innovators in congregations who sew, who do all of this art making, even to make their worship spaces beautiful. But they don't sort of see the way that this can actually move outside of the privatization of Sunday morning service into something larger for the community. Any suggestions on how?
I don't have suggestions. I have an example, though. I think that, first of all, I hadn't considered what you shared, so thank you for sharing that. The example that comes to mind for me is Rankin Chapel at Howard University. By naming, Rankin Chapel is clearly a chapel, right? Like God stuff happens in there. Somebody has a more technical term for what that means. There's God stuff going on. There's God stuff going on there. But I think that Rankin is very clear about its place. Let me just step back. Rankin Chapel is the chapel for Howard University. And it doesn't sit like an artifact, even though it's connected to a lot of key pivotal moments in Black history. It's a working chapel in that the ministry is very, I went to Haiti 3 times on doing an education project, for example, through Rankin Chapel. And it is a place where from the stained glass to the art that's performed there to the people that come through there meet what you're describing. I don't know if a lot of places of worship see that as an opportunity or a part of their ministry. It's very non-secular the way they approach it because it's a place of worship that does all of this work, including as a culture bearer. I wonder if there are others that, seeing Rankin in that example, might find an opportunity for them to, open up in a way that they hadn't before. I hadn't considered your question, but I think that there is a model out there, and I wonder what it would take to get others to adopt it.
My only quick addition is that in the first of 2 Culture Bank cohorts, we focused very clearly on artists who are social change artists already working in their community, guiding conversations with diverse community members through an open invitation. But the question became threaded by the artist and was prompted only in a very small way by Culture Bank. And it turned out that the important question was, of all the assets, in this case in West Oakland, what is the most important asset this community values above all else? And it turned out to be holding existing places and spaces. And if I were an artist and I'd guided a community through that conversation and that was the outcome, then I might know that my local faith institutions were places we should then invest more. And that's just the way my thought process works.
It's so interesting because churches aren't used that much as they once were, and that creates an incredible opportunity. I wonder how that would work.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions, so we'll take one here, and then we have one. Sorry. And then we'll see.
Right on, y'all. As an artist and musician, I really appreciate what you all said. A lot of this resonated with me, for real. My organization, we serve systems impacted people, many of whom are artists. And as a matter of fact, we're showcasing the artwork and music of our staff right after this, 5:30. Free drinks.
You live for a plug.
Right up the street, 986 Mission, 10-minute walk. Come through.
Repeat the address.
986 Mission. It's like 10 minutes from here, y'all. And that's happening at 5:30. So please come through. But here's my thing. When me and my colleagues have told folks that we serve systems impacted people, a lot of folks here have been, the reaction is, where's the investment and where's the impact? And I mean, this is my first time in SOCAP, so I'm like, word. But what is it going to take for investors to intrinsically understand that the impact is what these people bring to the community and the people are the investment, is my question.
Friends, we have a large problem. Okay, I have nothing wise to say. I'll just tell you what came to my mind as you were saying this, which is just, I think there has to be this reframing that we, and it's unfortunate, but like we are the carriers of this burden to do this reframing of like artists as an asset class, right? Because when you come to places like SOCAP, most folks are thinking about like fintech and real estate, right? Like I'm guilty. We're using real estate as a tool because we know that it's an investable product. Our end work is systems change, right? How do we change the systems that have impacted this neighborhood to get to the place where it needed to collectivize ownership in order to build wealth because there was no other path forward? because we weren't a viable asset class, right? And so what does it look like to do that narrative work? And some folks may know Mia Birdsong. She's from out here in Oakland, Afrofuturist, colleague of mine, did a fellowship with her a couple years ago. She's super dope. If you haven't read any of her work, I encourage you to do so, Mia Birdsong. But one of the things that she talks about is narrative shift, right? And so how do folks identify with just the concept of freedom? Very basic, right? Like, what does freedom mean to you? How does it show up in your life? What does it feel like? That is a 100-year narrative shift, right? So what does it look like to turn artists into an asset class, an investable asset class that people see value and worth and opportunity to regain capital and whatever other impact and whatever other thing you're trying to regain out of it? That work has to start with narrative. That's the thing that came to me when you said that. Not a wise whatever, but just the nugget that dropped in my head.
I would say the Bay has such a, I love the Bay. I'm from Philadelphia originally. I love the Bay. That bounce to what y'all do and the sauce is just, and I think it's underrated. I think that people forget that the Bay Area is a place of, it's a hotbed of activism. I think it's why Philly and the Bay vibe. It's embedded in your history and your art. And I wonder for you, to the advice about narrative change, if you want to have, like, there is no, the Bay Area, you don't get the Black Panthers without the culture and experience of the Bay Area. You don't get Tupac Shakur if he doesn't go to Milpitas High School. You don't get the way we think about Chicano art if you don't have the artists that have done the street murals in the Mission. This is like, there's something about this community and what it's powering to the world that I think that, and even contemporarily, right? Like, you know, you've got incredible artists, La Russell, I'm obsessed with right now. Larry June, I'm obsessed with right now. In every category, Bay Area artists are changing the way people think that they can express themselves. I wonder if connecting the dots to that, like Larry June sounds like he does because he's raised by his grandfather, an old man from the Bay who talks a certain kind of way. And it's the only reason why it's viral, it's commercial, is because he's channeling a very specific experience here. I think telling the stories of those examples is an incredible place to start because it's evidence that the theory about culture, especially from Black, brown, and queer people, and how it can change the way people talk and what they assign value to, that's embedded in the work that you're doing every day in this community. Tell that story, and I'm curious to see what the reaction is, because there's so much evidence to it. I love the Bay.
We might have time for just one really, really short, quick question, then we have to wrap. Anybody? One more?
Well, I actually don't know if mine is short.
It's short. We'll take it.
Okay, I'll ask it. I'm so curious to understand tactically your investment philosophy.
They want you to use a mic to record.
Thank you. Not a quick question, but I am just so curious to understand your investment philosophy when it comes to art.
Yeah.
Totally hear you. Like, artist is an asset class. You're speaking my language, and maybe I can ask this in like a short story. I have a friend who was a juvenile lifer, incarcerated for over 20 years. A poet turned visual artist, released from prison, extremely successful artist. Mm-hmm. We were having a conversation one day about like art for art's sake, and he was like, "What is that?" Yeah. Like, not every artist creates with like purpose in mind. Like, that isn't a thing. And it was really, really strange for him, this idea that you could like create for the sake of creating. And so I'm just so curious to understand like your philosophy when it comes to investing in art and what that looks like. And whether like purpose is embedded in everything in your mind, or if there are tiers of investability when it comes to like the end result and outcome of art that is designed to uplift community versus to like engage in the arts broadly, if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense. Do you want a cynical answer or like? Okay, so I think that so there's a personal investment philosophy. Then there's what I see other people do. If you believe that art is the expression of a very strong idea, making art for the sake of making art is really important, because I had to prepare for this panel. Like, that's the thing. And what people are evaluating when they're thinking about artists to invest in is the pace at which they make work to suggest that they're committed to doing it. Like, quite literally, I had someone, we were judging a prize competition for a very prestigious fair, and that was the feedback. They're like, well, this is dope, this is cool, but see how they didn't do anything in 3 years? And I'm like, I don't know, like what's that about? And so to your friend, it's like the making art for art's sake is same thing as like, why do you read? You become a better writer as a consequence. Like that motion of challenging your own ideas and challenging your ability to make work that reflects it the way you want it to is inherently valuable. Personally, when I find artists I'm really excited about, I like the drafts. So there's some artists that are like really doing really well, and they'll do a sale. Like a lot of artists are monetizing their work using social media or some ways. Not all of it's good. We can talk about that later. I will buy test prints. That's my personal philosophy. I love to be as connected to the process and them pushing this idea into the world as the final product. I think people get really excited about the final product. I'm very, very invested in early on. I think that the broader, the cynical element, I talked about people expecting you to make work, their art for art's sake is valuable because you're putting more shots on goal. Deciding where your final product lands because you've had time to consider where this idea belongs and where it should live is the most valuable thing an artist can do. From an investment perspective, the private market around art is going to do what it's going to do. I think that, as I said with Ernie Barnes, there are everyday people that can put money in an artist's pocket because they're telling a story that's completely native to our shared experience, and I'm not a billionaire. So like whatever a billionaire is attracted to would not be attractive to me. And artists that really stay in that lane and think about creating work that reflects their current reality is inherently valuable, and I think that largely investable, right? Especially to your friend when they say, well, why would I do this? Like you do it because the way you improve your jump shot is by being on the court every day, right? That's how you get drafted. And I think that if he's really thinking like more cynically, I think that's a message that relates quite well.